Hey everybody, I'm Chris Norman, and this is the next video in the Learning GURPS series, Characters, and this may be a big one. If you've watched my series up to this point, hopefully you've seen that learning GURPS isn't really that hard. It can be taken in easy, bite-sized steps and get as complex as you want to later. And the last thing you need is a character, or should I say the first thing you need is a character. But as I mentioned in the first video, building a character is the biggest con of playing GURPS. The first and most important thing you have to do when creating a new character in GURPS is define your character concept. If you think about it, when you're playing a game like D&D or Pathfinder, you can say that your character is a half-elven ranger, and pretty much everyone knows what that is. The class has defined abilities and characteristics, as does the race, which is nice because it's quick and well-defined, but also, in most of my D&D groups, we rarely had players use the same class because it's boring. I mean, 3 fighters in a group wasn't as interesting as a fighter, a ranger, and a paladin. But GURPS doesn't have classes, or races for that matter. Well, it can, but you define those classes and races using the 3 building blocks of character creation: attributes, advantages, and skills. That's it. Every character is just made up of a combination of those 3 things, plus flavor text and equipment. A class or race can be defined in a template, which you can think of as a menu or a recipe. Here's an example of a class template, and here's an example of a race template. Add these ingredients, pick a few from a choice of options, and voila, you have a class or race. But it is all still a combination of attributes, advantages, and skills. And you don't have to use them. Templates are just that, a template for building your character. You're more than welcome to build your character without using templates. Even things that might look like something else, like psionics, or the basic set magic system, or powers. They're all built from the 3 basic building blocks, usually with some added flavor text. But still, once you understand those 3, you understand most of GURPS. Okay, let me go over the easy ones first. Attributes are the numbers you're all used to: strength, dexterity, etc. And then GURPS has secondary attributes and then numbers that are calculated from the attributes like hit points and fatigue points and dodge. They're all well defined and easy to play with. And this is the perfect segue to mention the GURPS character sheet. If you do not have this installed, get it now. It is incredibly flexible, and yet, from a beginner standpoint, it's still pretty easy to use, and the WYSIWYG style is easy to understand. But your mileage may vary, and this is just my opinion. The reason you want a character creation tool is because of the math I mentioned in the first video. GURPS attributes are pretty easy to understand, but it still costs character points to purchase, and you may not know the relationship between primary and secondary and calculated attributes. But GCS does. You just type in the values you want, and it figures out how much that costs, and how that change affects everything else. I mean, if you think about it, it's an amazing amount of complexity that GCS hides from you. In preparing for this script, I rewatched Tori's video creating a pen and paper GURPS character, and oh my gosh! I could never play GURPS without GCS. And if you download now, you can get an extra 50% off by using the coupon code KNOWS. So 50% of 0 is 0. It costs nothing, and it saves you so much time. The next thing, advantages and disadvantages, also sometimes called traits, are, well, they're hard to define. I sometimes say that they are things that you are or things that you have or can do. And the basic set says, an advantage is a useful trait that gives you a mental, physical, or social edge over someone else who otherwise has the same abilities as you. Understand? But really, advantages are everything that's left over that's not an attribute or a skill. More on that later. Skills are things that you can learn or get better at. That's pretty easy to understand, and GURPS has a huge list of skills. Here's a table that shows you what skill level you could get per difficulty of skill, easy, average, hard, or very hard, and how many points you put into it. Think of it this way. For 1 character point, you would get a skill at these starting levels, depending on the difficulty of the skill. If the skill is an easy skill, 1 character point would get you the skill level equal to its defining attribute. For example, brawling is Dex easy. So 1 point in brawling would give you a skill level equal to your character's dex. Poisons is IQ hard, so 1 point in poisons would give you a skill level equal to your character's IQ minus 2. To raise any skill to the second level, you would pay a second point for a total of 2. To raise it to the third level, you'd pay 2 more points for a total of 4, and then 4 points per level after that. And it doesn't matter what kind of skill it is, easy, average, etc. The progression is the same, only the starting point differs. But don't worry, if this table doesn't make any sense, you don't really need to know it, and I'm sort of questioning why I mentioned it in this video. If you have GCS, it does the calculation for you. People have commented in earlier videos asking what are good values for skill levels. You can find references online or in the books, but here are some. And it depends on the total points you're allowed to spend for your character. The GM has to decide how powerful the campaign is going to be. And here's a general guideline from the basic set. The Dungeon Fantasy RPG starts at 250 points for its characters. The DFRPG is GURPS, but specifically for the fantasy genre. But it's also completely 100% compatible with other GURPS supplements. Long story. But if you want to focus on the fantasy genre, then DFRPG is a good way to get into GURPS. Later, if you want to include cowboys and aliens into your fantasy world, you can use any of the GURPS supplements or the basic set to add that stuff in. It all works together. But it doesn't matter where you start. If you see powered by GURPS, then it is GURPS. So that should get you started on attributes and skills. Now to advantages, and this might be its own video, we'll see. This actually brings me back to the very first video, where I talk about the letters in the name GURPS. The last 3 letters stand for role-playing system, obviously. But in GURPS, you can actually build role-play requirements into your character. Alright, what do I mean by that? Well, remember when I keep talking about that old drunken, lecherous, gunslinging cleric, Jake? Yes, he was a drunk. I actually purchased the advantage of alcoholism. Well, obviously it's a disadvantage, but in GURPS, a disadvantage is just an advantage with a negative cost. The level of alcoholism that I purchased gave me a control roll of 12 or less. As I mentioned in a previous video, in the Spellslinger campaign, I failed the alcoholism roll and spent the evening with the saloon lady, only to find out later she was the undead creature we were hunting for. My character smelled of death in the morning and he didn't know it, but that gave us a clue, which allowed us to find the creature and dispatch her. Of course, the party never let me forget that one. But beyond the good story of sleeping with the undead madam, why would I ever purposely purchase alcoholism? Well, it's because of the cost of minus 10 points, which allowed me to spend those 10 points on something else. So if the GM says that your character limit is 200 points, with up to 30 points in disadvantages, that means you can actually buy a character up to 230 points, so long as you take the minus 30 points in disadvantages. And this is what they meant by role-playing system. You can buy positive characteristics like charisma or sex appeal, or you can buy negative ones like social stigma or ugliness. Besides the extra points it gives you, it also gives you the ability to role-play around that defect. Or it gives the GM the ability to incorporate that defect into their story. So when you're coming up with your character concept, you really have to go beyond half-elven ranger. You may have noticed that I always refer to Jake as that old, drunken, lecherous, gunslinging cleric. It's a little better because it also describes his disadvantages. In the description below is my introduction letter for my current character, Grend. I wrote it in the first person as if it was an application to the party, and I used it as my character concept. Can you pick out some of his advantages and disadvantages? I'll link his character sheet also, so you can see how I mapped this concept into GURPS. When you look through all the advantages and disadvantages, there's a huge amount. It's much easier to come up with a concept first and see if you can map it into GURPS than it is to go fishing and look through the book to find advantages. Of course you can do that, and I have done it, but later, once you're more familiar with GURPS. Try not to dive in too deeply too early, or you might fall down the rabbit hole. Now, some advantages are simple on-off things. Ambidexterity, for example. A character can be ambidextrous for 5 character points. If you read the rules for that advantage, it just removes the -4 modifier when attacking with the offhand. Are you using the offhand attack rules? You don't need to, see the combat video. That's just one example of an advantage, and it could be one that you don't allow in your world because you're not using the offhand attack rules. Yet. Then there are advantages that are leveled. like the advantage called innate attack. At first I was a bit confused by the advantage name, but it just means your character has the ability to do some kind of damaging attack that is innate or part of them without requiring a weapon. A good example in a Supers campaign would be a frost beam that shoots from the character's finger, but could also be a ball of fire thrown by a fire elemental or a gust of wind created by a wizard. The innate attack advantage explains the costs and the amount and type of damage for each level purchased, and you just provide the thematic description. But wait, there's more, which is a sad thing to say since I'm trying to reduce complexity. But you can also imply enhancements and limitations to an advantage. There are 15 pages in the basic set that describe these. Enhancements make the advantage more powerful, but also cost more. Limitations give you a discount, and advantages can have both. An example of an enhancement is the damage modifier explosion. Let's say the character that can shoot the frost beam would like it to explode into shards of ice upon impact, doing damage to everything around it. That's the explosion enhancement, which raises the cost of the advantage by 50% per level of explosion. But to make the advantage more affordable, the player might also add a limitation, like costs fatigue, or limited uses per day, or takes time to recharge, or accessibility. Accessibility is a tough one. It's the catch-all limitation that you can use to cover any restriction not specifically defined elsewhere. And this is used a lot, but fortunately the authors have already applied it to many advantages, so you don't have to. Take the flight advantage, which costs 50 points. But if you look up the advantage, you'll see a list of special enhancements and limitations already prepared for you. If you can fly into outer space, then that's an enhancement costing an additional 25%. If you can only glide but not climb, then that's a limitation that gives you a 50% discount. You get the picture? And trust me, if you didn't want GCS before, you'll want it now. The math, remember? Okay, we will definitely have a separate video about advantages, I promise. And now I'll talk about powers. What? Crap, another thing? Well, a power is just an advantage with limitations and enhancements applied, plus some flavor text to indicate a source of power. Is it magical, or divine, or something else? And this is actually just a limitation. If the power is magical, then it's susceptible to anti-magic. If the power is divine, then your deity can withhold it from you if you don't follow the rules. Powers also have a focus, but again, this is just flavor text. The idea is that you create your powers around some concept, like Frostman, or Flame Boy, or Unusually Average Accountant Man. There are no rules based on that. You just have to get agreement with your GM that the power would fit into your theme. And magic, don't get me started, because that's definitely another video. Suffice to say, there are at least 4 different magic systems in GURPS, each with their own positives and negatives. But starting out, I would stick with the basic set, or DFRPG magic spells, known as Magic as Skills. This is the easiest to understand and use when somebody's starting out in GURPS. But my personal favorite is Magic as Powers, and I'll explain why in the magic video. Alright, I can see how all of this contributes to the bad reputation of complex character creation. You can either look at the character creation as being bad for being so complex, or fantastic for allowing you such complexity. Your choice. Personally, I love it. I enjoy tweaking my character in various ways to see what I can come up with, but you may not. As the GM, you can control how much complexity you want to add to your game. Starting out, you may want to limit the advantages your players can choose from. But no matter what, let them know that everything on the character sheet is by agreement only. This will give you the chance to veto something outrageous or fix something broken. And while going through the books, you may read about other things like techniques or lenses. Just stay away for now. They're just more of the same, special ways to group and use attributes, advantages, and skills. Not necessary to play, and in fact, in 10 years, I've actually never used either. In summary, start small. Use the GURPS LITE list of advantages and skills, and go with that. Incorporate any basic set advantages as needed. Make certain you download and install GCS so it does all the heavy lifting for you, and go to town. Okay, you're done. You've created 1 or more characters. Now what? You probably noticed that characters don't have levels. Yeah, it's all a side effect of the purchasing. In GURPS, you don't go from a level 1 druid to a level 2 druid. Instead, your GM will award you character points. And at appropriate times, you'll take those points and spend them, just like you did when you were creating the character. It's up to the GM how they give out the character points. They may give you 1 or 2 points per session, or they might wait and give you 10 or 15 points at the end of the adventure. It's up to them. Just remember that adding character points because of experience gained works the same way as purchasing the character at the very beginning. There's nothing different. You just spend the character points to enhance your character however you and your GM see fit, which can also include buying off an advantage. If you pay back the cost of the disadvantage, you can remove it from your character, of course, with your GM's approval. So over time, Jake could buy down his alcoholism until he could get rid of it completely. All right, you've made it to the end, so I'll let you in on a little secret. Douglas Cole's Delvers to Go streamlines character creation for the fantasy genre into a series of options. Basically, you pick the various modules that fit your character idea and apply them. It's a good midpoint between the class system of D&D or Pathfinder and the completely open system in GURPS. It's a great way to get started with a GURPS character without having to delve too deep into the bowels of the basic set. Yes, it can seem daunting, but I assure you it can be tackled in small steps. And if worse comes to worse, come join us on the GURPS Discord and ask questions. We're a really friendly group. And as always, thank you for watching.